What is going on, my friends? Welcome back to another day of the Daily Dose. It's your boy Adam, and I'm hitting you up with day number 163. We are starting a new book today. We've been moving through the book of Proverbs, a lot of wise wisdom from Solomon, and we reached the climax of that with the final chapter yesterday. And we're starting off a new book, Ecclesiastes, today. So because it's a new book, we have got a new video for y'all. Go down below in the link, click on that link, and it will take you, well, there's two links. One link down below is for the Bible PDF plan for the reading guide that we're doing, right? It's a PDF file that shows you what verses we're reading what day as we go through this this plan that walks us through the whole Bible over the course of the year. We also have a video that is a link from our friends at Read Scripture, aka the Bible Project, and that will give you a brief rundown and synopsis of the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay, so we're going to be covering chapters 1 through 4 and Psalm number 8 today. Ecclesiastes, if you were to ask me to sum it up in one sentence, it is a story of meaninglessness and despair in the mundane, ongoing stuff of our everyday lives, right? Solomon seems to be the one that wrote this. And there's a few sections that these first four chapters are broken into, okay? The first section is, the theme is sort of everything is meaningless, right? Just everything happens in vain. It's all meaningless. It's futile is another very good word for that, right? Futile. A lot of stuff is happening, but what ultimately comes of it, right? And again, ultimately, if we think about God and his plan, right, nothing is futile. God's plan comes to pass. But I think that Solomon is writing this, again, more on like a horizontal level. Just the things he sees looking around the world from a human perspective, right? Not so much from a Godward perspective. So starting at chapter 1, it just talks about, verse 5, just the mundane cycle of the world, the cycle of life. Okay, it says the sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises, right? So it's kind of like what happened. It's chasing its tail, right? The sun rose, the sun set, same thing next day. Same thing next day. Every day, same thing. Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset. Just goes on and on and on and on, and it gets boring and it gets mundane and it gets tedious. Then it says the wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course, right? And again, sometimes the wind blows one way, and then a storm might come through and blow it back this way. Certain times of the year, in certain places, there are northeasterly winds and southwesterly winds, and it's like a cycle. You know, it's just kind of the same thing, back and forth, back and forth. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. That's interesting, right? I mean, nowadays we know about evaporation and about storm cycles and all that kind of stuff and humidity and the barometer. But if you just think about it on its most basic terms, that's pretty crazy, right? It's pretty crazy. You've got the sea, the oceans, and you've got sea level, and you've got ocean levels. And then you've got all of these rivers and tributaries that are flowing into the seas and into the oceans all the time. But the sea level is never really rising because of that or going down. If you look at it on a much more localized level, there's a river I like to kayak. It's on the border of Carolina and Georgia. It's called the Chattooga River. It's broken up into a few different sections, but the most crazy and fun section is section 4 of the Chattooga River, okay? You're going down the river. Once you get about 2/3 of the way through, you go down into this very steep canyon. You've got these sheer rock wall cliffs called the Raven Cliffs. They go up hundreds of feet on both sides of you. So you're down in this river, and it's not a massive wide river like the Mississippi, right? Not that kind of river. Just kind of your average, normal, everyday run-of-the-mill creek/river, right? Just a decent-sized little river. And so you know you're about to get into the tough stuff when you see those sheer canyon walls, because that tells you that there is about to be a big drop coming up. There's going to be a whole lot of gradient coming up. So when you approach the end of the river, there is a section of 5 rapids, which are between class 3 and 5, right? They're relatively serious stuff. People die there. It's not uncommon. And you go through these rapids, and once you get to the end, it's no longer a river. It turns into a lake. and it's flat water. Like the water is just absolutely flat. You have to paddle for I don't know how far, a mile, 2 miles, however many miles. You have to paddle the whole way to get down to where the takeout ramp is to get off the river. And it's so crazy to me that you've got this river that is pouring down into this lake all day, every day, nonstop, all day, every day, nonstop, right? It's pouring into this lake. But for the most part, the lake level doesn't change very much. You would think that with this nonstop, constant flow of water coming in, that over time, the lake would just get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. But it doesn't, okay? Anyways, back to the scripture. So if we go look at the next section, the next little section, it kind of talks about how wisdom can seem meaningless, at least on a human level. Sometimes wisdom can seem meaningless. And one verse here, this is chapter 1, verse 18. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. You ever thought about that? Like sometimes it's better to not know, because when you start to know stuff that's sad, it can make you even more sad. Like, for example, any of you guys ever see those commercials on TV for the ASPCA? I forgot what it stands for, but you know, they accept donations and they help take care of animals. They have animal shelters, they have adoption programs, like that's what they do. They try to find forever homes for homeless animals, basically. One of the things that they do. But these commercials are so sad because they show some of the situations that some of these animals are in when they're found, and it's extremely sad, right? So that is a case where the more I know, the more sorrow I have, right? And in some cases that's good, because how can we help people if we don't know that people are in need? But I think I get what Solomon is saying here, right? The more you know, the more sorrow you're going to have, potentially. The more knowledge, the more grief. The next section goes in to talk about pleasures and how pleasures are or can seem meaningless, right? Moving on to chapter 2, verse 10 and 11. He says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Whoa, can you imagine that? Solomon is saying, look, I didn't deny anything from myself that my eyes wanted. If I saw it and I wanted it, I had it. And I'm sure he's talking about women because he had 700 wives and like 300 concubines. But I'm sure anything else, right? So essentially what he's saying is, I didn't lack anything. I had every single thing that I wanted. And then he says, I refused my heart no pleasure. So again, if he thought something would provide himself pleasure, he went after that pleasure, right? So this guy is basically saying, I was all in to please my eyes, to please my flesh, to please my desires. I was all in to please me by any means necessary. And then he says, my heart took delight in all of my labor. So his heart enjoyed all of this. And this was the reward for my toil. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. So here he's talking about all these pleasures that he's experienced, but in the end, like Linkin Park would say, nothing really mattered, right? Then there's a section about wisdom and folly and how wisdom and folly are meaningless. Then there's a section that talks about how toiling is meaningless. And then there is that section that many people are familiar with where it talks about a time for everything, right? There's a time for everything, a season for every activity under the sun. There's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build. And then the last couple sections talk about oppression, toil, and friendliness, and they talk about how advancement is meaningless, right? And this is kind of interesting. When I think about advancement, I think about moving up in a job, in a career, right? Pretty much everywhere I've worked, I've started out in a relatively low position, and I've managed to work my way up, at least a little bit, in some cases a lot. So I can kind of relate to this, kind of chasing or seeking self-promotion, advancement, right? Here, Solomon says, I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before him. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Interesting. Interesting. So, anyways, that's all I got for y'all for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. Hit the like button down below. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you want to. And until we meet again, we'll do it again tomorrow. Deuces.